The restaurant was called Sakura Garden, one of those expensive places where they cook the food right in front of you. My husband Dennis had chosen it for our 40th wedding anniversary. 40 years, 4 decades of marriage, 2 children, 5 grandchildren, and what I thought was a partnership built on honesty. I wore the navy dress Dennis bought me last Christmas, the one he said made me look elegant. At 62, I didn't feel elegant most days. I felt tired, invisible, like furniture that had been in the house, so long nobody noticed it anymore. But tonight was special, so I made an effort. Dennis sat across from me, scrolling through his phone while we waited for our chef. He barely looked up when I commented on the beautiful cherry blossom decorations. That should have been my first warning that something was wrong. What Dennis didn't know, what nobody in my American life knew, was that I spoke fluent Japanese. My mother was Japanese from Osaka. She died when I was 16, but not before teaching me her language perfectly. I never mentioned it to Dennis when we met in college. It never seemed important. We built our life in Ohio, far from my mother's culture, and I let that part of myself fade into the background. I became Marlena Voss, dutiful wife and mother, forgetting I was once Marlena Tanaka, the girl who dreamed in 2 languages. But the language never left me. I still understood every word, every nuance, every insult. That night at Sakura Garden, that forgotten skill became the key that unlocked a truth I never wanted to discover. Our chef arrived, a young Japanese man named Kenji who smiled warmly and introduced himself in English. Then Dennis's business partner, Garrett Yashida, walked through the door with his wife Fumiko. I hadn't known they were joining us. Dennis stood up quickly, shaking Garrett's hand with enthusiasm he hadn't shown me all evening. Garrett was Japanese-American, successful, the kind of man Dennis always tried to impress. Fumiko was visiting from Tokyo. Elegant and quiet, she bowed slightly to me, and I returned the gesture out of habit. Dennis laughed and said something about me being so cultured. The way he said it felt like mockery, though I couldn't explain why. We all sat down, and that's when my world began to crack apart. Garrett and Fumiko started speaking Japanese to each other. Casual conversation about the menu and the restaurant. Dennis couldn't understand them. I could see it in his blank expression. But then Garrett switched to English and asked Dennis how business was going. Dennis launched into a story about a deal he'd closed, exaggerating his role as usual. I'd heard this story 5 times already. While Dennis talked, Fumiko leaned toward Garrett and whispered something in Japanese. She said, "His wife looks so sad. Do you think she's ill?" Garrett glanced at me, then whispered back in Japanese. "Dennis says she's just old and depressing now. He's waiting for the right time." My blood turned to ice. Waiting for the right time for what? I kept my face perfectly neutral. Years of suppressing emotions suddenly paying off. Fumiko continued in Japanese. "That's cruel. 40 years of marriage deserves respect." Garrett shrugged and replied, "He told me she's gained weight, stopped caring about herself. He wants someone younger, more energetic. He's been seeing someone for 8 months. 8 months, the words hit me like a physical blow. But I didn't move, didn't react. I reached for my water glass with steady hands and took a small sip. Dennis was still talking in English about his business success, completely unaware that his partner had just exposed his affair in a language he thought I couldn't understand. I looked at my husband's face, really looked at it, and saw a stranger. The chef began cooking, flames shooting up from the grill in impressive displays. Everyone clapped politely. I watched Dennis laugh at something Garrett said. His face relaxed and happy. He looked younger when he smiled like that. I realized he hadn't smiled at me that way in years. When had we stopped being happy? When had I become the burden he complained about to his business partner? Garrett said something else in Japanese to Fumiko. Quieter this time. Dennis plans to file for divorce after their anniversary trip next month. He wants to take her somewhere nice first. Feels less guilty that way. Fumiko made a disgusted sound, using a vacation to soften the blow of betrayal. Men like that make me ashamed. I agreed with her completely. Dinner continued like a play where I was the only one who knew the real script. Dennis ordered for me without asking what I wanted, something he'd started doing years ago. He chose the salmon because he said I needed to watch my cholesterol. Garrett and Fumiko exchanged another look. She whispered in Japanese, "He treats her like a child." Dennis didn't notice any of this. He was too busy impressing Garrett with stories about golf games and business deals. I ate my salmon slowly, each bite tasting like ash. 40 years of cooking his favorite meals, raising his children, supporting his career. And this was my reward: a husband who found me depressing and old, who was planning to abandon me after one final vacation to ease his conscience. I excused myself to use the restroom, walking on legs that felt disconnected from my body. In the mirror, I saw what Dennis apparently saw: gray hair I'd stopped coloring 2 years ago because he said it looked distinguished, wrinkles around my eyes from 4 decades of smiling, a body that had carried 2 babies and now carried the weight of age. I looked like a 62-year-old woman, which is exactly what I was. When had that become a crime? When had aging together stopped being part of our marriage vows? I washed my hands slowly, trying to steady my breathing. I needed to be smart about this. I needed to think clearly. Going back to that table and confronting Dennis would accomplish nothing except public humiliation. When I returned, dessert had arrived. Dennis had ordered me green tea ice cream without asking. He smiled at me for the first time that evening and said, "Happy anniversary, Marlena, 40 years with my best friend." The lie was so smooth, so practiced. I wondered how many other lies I'd swallowed over the years. Believing they were truth, Garrett shifted uncomfortably. And Fumiko wouldn't meet my eyes. She knew something was wrong, could sense my pain. Even if she didn't know, I understood every word she'd said. As we prepared to leave, Dennis announced he'd planned a special trip to Hawaii for next month. 2 weeks in Maui, ocean view suite. Everything I could want. His last gift before destroying my life. The drive home was silent. Dennis hummed along to the radio. Relaxed and satisfied, I stared out the window at the dark streets of our neighborhood. Houses where other couples probably had honest marriages. When we pulled into our driveway, I looked at our house, the one we'd bought 35 years ago. I'd planted every flower in that garden, chosen every curtain, made every room a home. Tomorrow, I decided, things would change. But tonight, I would sleep next to my husband one more time, knowing the truth he thought was safely hidden. In the darkness of our bedroom, Dennis fell asleep within minutes, snoring softly. I lay awake, my mind racing through 40 years of memories, wondering how many of them were real and how many were just elaborate performances. Morning came with painful clarity. Dennis left for work early, kissing my forehead like he always did, playing the role of devoted husband perfectly. After his car disappeared down the street, I sat at our kitchen table with coffee and began planning. I wasn't the young, naive girl Dennis had married. I was a 62-year-old woman who'd raised 2 successful children, managed a household, and survived breast cancer 3 years ago. I was stronger than he realized. First, I called our daughter Violet. She was a lawyer in Chicago, sharp and protective. I told her everything I'd overheard at dinner. She was silent for a long moment, then said, "Mom, we're going to protect you. Don't do anything yet, let me make some calls." Her fury on my behalf felt like armor. Next, I did something I'd never done before. I went through Dennis's home office. Something he'd always told me was off limits because of confidential business documents. In his desk drawer, under a folder labeled Taxes 2019, I found a phone I'd never seen before. A secret phone. My hands shook as I turned it on. The messages were all there, hundreds of them, exchanged with someone named Shayla. She was 34 years old according to her profile picture. Blonde and smiling, the messages made me sick. Dennis called her baby, told her he couldn't wait to start their life together, promised her trips and jewelry and freedom. He told her I was a burden he'd carried for too long, that he deserved happiness in his final good years. I photographed everything with my own phone. Every message, every picture, every promise Dennis had made to this woman while sleeping next to me each night. Violet had taught me about evidence during her law school years. She'd said the person with the best documentation wins. So I documented everything. I found receipts for jewelry I'd never received, restaurant bills from places we'd never gone together, hotel confirmations for weekends Dennis claimed he was at business conferences. The affair wasn't just 8 months old. Based on these receipts, it had been going on for at least 2 years. 2 years of lies, stacked so carefully I'd never suspected. 2 years of being called old and depressing, while he played out a romance with someone young enough to be our daughter. That afternoon, Violet called back with a plan. She'd contacted a forensic accountant and a private investigator. She'd also spoken with her brother, our son Camden, who was furious. Both my children wanted to fly home immediately, but I told them to wait. I needed to handle this carefully. Quietly, Dennis was smart and well-connected. If he knew I was preparing for divorce, he'd hide assets, manipulate accounts, make everything disappear. Violet explained that Ohio was an equitable distribution state, meaning marital assets would be divided fairly. But fair didn't mean equal, and Dennis would fight to keep as much as possible. We needed ironclad evidence of the affair, proof of hidden money, documentation of everything. I had one advantage: Dennis still thought I was the sad, depressing old wife who suspected nothing. For 3 weeks, I played my role perfectly. I smiled when Dennis came home. I cooked his favorite dinners. I talked about the Hawaii trip with fake enthusiasm, asking what activities he wanted to do. He seemed pleased that I was excited, probably relieved that his guilt relief vacation was working. Meanwhile, the private investigator Violet hired followed Dennis to restaurants, hotels, and Shayla's apartment. The forensic accountant discovered Dennis had been moving money into accounts I didn't know existed, preparing to hide assets before filing for divorce. He'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. Every smile he gave me was calculated. Every "I love you" was strategy. The man I'd married no longer existed, if he ever had. One evening, Dennis suggested we have dinner with Garrett and Fumiko again. I agreed immediately. This time, I had a plan of my own. We met at another Japanese restaurant, and again, Garrett and Fumiko spoke freely in Japanese. Assuming I couldn't understand, Fumiko asked Garrett directly, "Has Dennis told her yet?" Garrett replied, "No, he's waiting until after Hawaii. He wants to end things on a positive note." Fumiko shook her head in disgust. Then I did something that shocked everyone at the table. I responded in perfect Japanese. "There will be no Hawaii trip, and there will be no positive note." The look on their faces was worth 40 years of silence. Garrett's mouth fell open. Fumiko gasped. Dennis looked confused, not understanding what I'd said but sensing something had shifted. I switched to English and looked directly at Dennis. "I've known about Shayla for 3 weeks. I've known about your plans to divorce me. I've known that you think I'm old, depressing, and a burden. I heard everything at Sakura Garden because..." Surprise, I speak fluent Japanese. Dennis's face went white, then red. He started to speak, but I held up my hand. "I'm not finished. I know about the secret phone, the hidden bank accounts, the jewelry you bought her with our money. I know about every lie you've told over the past 2 years. My lawyer knows too. So does the forensic accountant who's currently documenting every cent you tried to hide." Dennis stood up suddenly, his chair scraping loudly. Other diners turned to look. "Marlena, you're being ridiculous. Let's discuss this at home." "No," I said calmly. "We're done discussing anything. The divorce took 6 months. Dennis fought hard. But I fought harder. The evidence was overwhelming: documented affair, hidden assets, financial manipulation." The judge was not sympathetic to a man who tried to cheat his wife of 40 years out of what she'd rightfully earned. "I got the house, half of his pension, half of his business assets, and a significant monthly support payment. Dennis got Shayla, who apparently lost interest once she realized his money would be divided. She left him 3 months after the divorce was finalized. I heard through mutual friends that Dennis was miserable, living in a small apartment, angry at the world. I felt nothing about his situation. Not satisfaction, not pity, nothing. He'd made his choices. These were his consequences. My children supported me through everything, reminding me daily of my worth. On what would have been our 41st anniversary, I did something I'd always wanted to do. I bought a plane ticket to Japan and visited my mother's hometown of Osaka. I walked the streets she'd walked, ate the food she'd loved, spoke the language she'd taught me. I felt her presence there, proud of me for finally honoring the part of myself I'd hidden for so long. I met distant cousins who welcomed me with tears and open arms. They showed me pictures of my mother as a young woman, beautiful and strong. I realized I looked like her now. And that wasn't something to be ashamed of. I was 63 years old, gray-haired, wrinkled, and absolutely worthy of respect. In Osaka, surrounded by family I'd never known, I finally felt free. Today, at 64, I volunteer at a community center teaching Japanese to immigrants and anyone interested in learning. I help other women going through divorce, sharing my story as a reminder that it's never too late to stand up for yourself. My children visit often, bringing my grandchildren who think it's amazing that grandma speaks 2 languages. I date occasionally, nothing serious, just enjoying companionship without the weight of betrayal. Sometimes I think about that dinner at Sakura Garden. The moment everything changed, a forgotten language became my salvation. If I'd never understood those whispered words, I might have gone to Hawaii, smiled through the divorce Dennis had planned, and accepted whatever scraps he offered. Instead, I fought back. I honored my mother's memory, my own worth, and the truth that age doesn't diminish value. It was Dennis who lost everything that mattered. I simply gained myself back. If something feels wrong in your relationship, trust that feeling. If you possess knowledge others don't know about, use it wisely when the time is right. Age is not a burden or a failure. It's a crown earned through years of surviving, learning, and growing stronger. 40 years of partnership deserved honesty. But when honesty wasn't given, documentation and truth became the greatest weapons. Never let anyone convince you that growing older makes you less valuable. You are worthy at every age, in every season of life. Stand up for yourself, no matter how long you've been silent. Hidden knowledge can become your greatest protection. Document everything, trust yourself. Age is power, not weakness. Before you go, I need to know something. What hit you the hardest? The betrayal. The moment everything fell apart. The twist you never saw coming. Drop it in the comments right now. And tell me what you want to see next. Medical fraud, family secrets, financial crimes, hidden identities. Your ideas become our next stories. If this story kept you glued to the screen, hit that like button. If you want more shocking true stories that expose the truth, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's coming next. Thanks for letting me share this story with you. The next one drops soon, and it's going to shake you even harder. See you there.